the magic button here in the OBS. Theoretically, that should be us. I'll double check over on the Oh yeah, I see our faces. That's a good sign. I've got my wife QAing in the other room, so if anything really weird happens, hopefully she'll let me know. It's Monday. We survived. Happy February, Mr. Carducci. Welcome. Did you think we were going to make it?
Yeah, I still take everything day by day. I'm going to be
Everything's day
honest.
by day. Everything. You can't get ahead of yourself. See, I learned in 2020 never to say like, things couldn't get any worse or thank goodness that's like the bottom because then like murder hornets happened. You and I were talking about that tweet last week. The one with,
Oh yeah, no, and that's the thing that we're so accustomed to the insanity that
right?
has just been a daily part of our lives
Right.
that you don't really think about, and that's why I loved that tweet. So the tweet for anybody with listening, watching, whatever, was just kind of a tongue-in-cheek timeline. It was like day 24 of the pandemic. I made bread. Day 95 of the pandemic. I sure miss my friends. Day 310 of the pandemic. The capital appears to be under the control of a shirtless man wearing a Viking helmet. Day 330 of the pandemic. It was Reddit's coordinated takedown of Wall Street is going as planned. And there's more of these
Right.
that if you just string them together, it's the most unlikely, unbelievable, absurd reality that we're in. And I don't know who I was talking to yesterday, but I was talking about at what point the timeline forked. Oh, that was it. I was watching old reruns of The Simpsons last night with my
Right.
wife, and they had Rudy Giuliani making a cameo.
No way.
And my first thought was, why are they not in an alley?
Right.
And he got a glowing introduction by Mayor Quimby and America's mayor and all of this, and I was like, oh right, that's back when Rudy Giuliani was widely considered a generally respectable person, before obviously
Before the
everything is
hair
very
dye.
polarized. I'm not going to get into that, but back when everybody kind of agreed that he was America's mayor, and I was just, it was just bizarre for a moment because I had to cast my mind back to where I believe the timeline forked Back to the Future 2 style.
There we go.
And here we are now. So in the
You,
strangest possible timeline, but to your point, we made it.
well, I think if you see any photos where you're sort of gradually fading out, that should give you some pause, right? I
Yeah,
mean, that's got to
that's
be next.
all of a sudden I can't strum with my right hand on my guitar anymore. I can still make
Exactly.
chords, but
Exactly. You have to tie your own shoes. They don't automatically tie themselves.
Nike
They have them.
released.
Yes.
Do they have the self tying now?
They have a couple of variants of it. And the thing that stops me is the fact they're like $500 a piece. So that, or $500 for the pair, obviously, and they have to be charged, which is also a little weird. I have a hard enough. Well, I'm do pretty good, I think, at keeping everything topped up, but I don't know that I want to worry about putting my shoes on the charger when I get home.
I feel like this is a perfect application for these kind of self winding technologies, where as you move, it just takes your
Right?
kinetic energy and spins a little spring that I remember we did really good with clockwork radios and things like that a while back.
Right? I mean, if we can
By
do
a
it for
while
a
back, I
watch,
mean
why can't we do it for
25 years
shoes?
ago. Yeah, there's just
Well,
got to be something there.
I'm sure there is. I'm sure there is. Well, I suppose, Michael, before we get too far, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us who you are for those few souls out there who are unfamiliar with the man, the myth, the legend that is Michael Carducci.
That is certainly the myth. Arguably the man, I don't know. But yeah, my name is Michael Carducci. I'm a software engineer turned professional magician turned software architect. And I live in this intersection now, of these broad dueling careers that I've had for all of my adult life. And I kind of live at the intersection of these two sets. One of these sets is technology, one of these sets is magic, and I'm somewhere in the middle. And I don't know what that makes me anymore, because I'm not really a magician. I'm not just a software architect. And so what I finally settled on was this idea right here, that I'm some kind of digital alchemist, because there's definitely some science to what I'm doing, but there's
Right.
also some magic to what I'm doing. And I get to play with really exciting cutting edge technologies today. I'm working for I've got a new day job where they brought me in as a principal architect, and we're kind of inventing the future. And I feel like if you're doing that, you need a little bit of magic.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And I think, you know, one of the things that gets lost in software is this is an interesting combination of things. I've always felt that software was much more artistic than we give it credit for. It's more about problem solving than it is about some hardcore science aspects of it. And so I think there's a lot to be said for being able to blend some of those ideas together. I don't see it as weird as maybe other people might. I mean, some of the best programmers I know don't have a computer science background. One was a chemist. I knew a philosophy major that was really good at this. I knew one person who was actually, I think, a PhD in music something or another, and phenomenal developer. So I think there's a wide variety of mindsets that can get you into this line of work. But
And I think that's a really important point to hit on, is that there's no one path.
no,
And not only that, we've got a challenge that we're trying to solve problems. And actually, I'm gonna throw an analogy that I really love, that I learned from Llewellyn Falco. You'll see him on various conferences and things like that as well. He's an agile technical coach, but he phrased this really well. Nate, where do you keep your ketchup? Do you keep it in the fridge, or do you keep it in the cupboard? There are
my,
two dueling schools of thoughts.
my ketchup, once it's opened, lives in the fridge.
As is mine, and that's okay, right? It turns out it doesn't really matter. Most ketchup's
Okay.
shelf stable. There's so much sugar and stuff in there that you can put it either. But there are people who keep their ketchup in the cupboard, and that's perfectly acceptable as well. That's safe to do. That's reasonable to do. But what happens is you get different perspectives as a result of this decision. So
Sure.
if you open your fridge to go get the ketchup as a condiment for whatever you're eating, and you are out of ketchup, well, you're going to grab something ketchup adjacent,
Sure.
probably in the door of your fridge, because that's where people tend to keep their
Yep.
condiments. You're going to grab something ketchup adjacent. Maybe you're going to grab mayonnaise. Maybe you're going to
Barbecue
grab
sauce.
a barbecue sauce. Sure. Now, if you're going into the cupboard
Mm,
and the cupboard is not bare, but there's an absence of ketchup, what you're going to do is you're going to grab something ketchup adjacent from the cupboard, and you get different alternatives from the same problem.
sure.
And I love that this is something that we see in software development, because we're solving problems and we need these different perspectives. And honestly, it never really, I never really thought of my moonlighting as a magician for the first half of my career as an asset. It was just kind of my side hustle. It's kind of
Sure.
what I did. And it wasn't until I got asked, what do you want to talk about at this conference, and just got some, a blank check, as it were, to just talk about whatever interested me, that I really started thinking about this, and I realized that just having this additional set of experience as a magician gave me very different perspective on problem
Right.
solving. Because as a technologist, yeah, I used to come in and everything was kind of black or white. Well, we can do this or we can't, or whatever else. But with magic, it's the same thing. You start with requirements. And in fact, the only difference between software requirements and magic requirements is that by definition, your magic requirements have to be impossible. If it's not impossible, there's no point in doing it.
Right.
And and you change the entire conversation in your head. Instead of saying, can I do this? Can I solve this problem? The question becomes, how can I solve that problem? And it creates a very different dynamic. In fact, just today, I was chatting with one of my peers on the architecture team, and we were talking about this challenge of, in a distributed, asynchronous, loosely coupled architecture, how do we assign identities in a predictable, deterministic, non-overlapping way? And and so I rephrased the question just in the context of that conversation. The question, somebody says, well, can we delegate this to the database that we're asynchronously talking to? And I said, well, let's rephrase that. How can we delegate it to the database?
Right.
How could we do this in a multi-leader scenario, or how can we do this without having to elect a leader node in the application layer? And just that alone starts to change the conversation and changes what we get out of there.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. Now, before I jump into that, I do want to mention, as I'm thinking about what's in my cupboard, Vegemite, I think we can all agree, should never be used on as a condiment, right? I don't think Vegemite's appropriate.
uh well, we do have an international audience, so I don't know. I spent my formative years in the UK, where our version of Vegemite is Marmite. and Marmite being famous for its sharply divided opinion. In fact, their slogan is "You either love it or hate it,"
Yes.
and and uh, I love that they would shoot the exact same commercial with the exact same storyboard, and one would be people loving it, one would be people hating it.
Yep. Yeah, well,
But
I bring it up because one of my friends and colleagues is from Australia, and we had in honor of Australia Day but a collection of Australian treats showed up at his behest, and there was in fact Vegemite in that box, and I just cannot bring myself. I'm clearly on the hate it side. I just not for me, I guess would be the moral of
I
the story.
I have not acquired either of those tastes as well. I maybe I need to give it another shot, but right now I will pass on the Marmite and Vegemite.
I think that's fair. I think that's fair. So I know you spent a lot of time in the UK. Talk a bit about that. How did you end up there? What was it like to be essentially an expat as a young lad in a foreign land, or at least they spoke the language? Although I know in some of the conversations you and I've had, certain words don't translate quite the same.
No, no, they don't. I learned many of those the hard way. I'm not going to go into those stories just because I want to keep this as G or PG as possible.
Totally fair.
But but yeah, it is very easy to step on linguistic landmines. No, I actually liked. I think it was Mark Twain described the U.S. and the UK as two nations or two. I guess the UK is technically a collection of nations. I don't know, but two lands joined by a common body of water separated by a common language.
Yes.
Um, I actually moved to England at the age of 14. My mom got remarried. She married an English gentleman, and I came as part of the deal. Boy, was he surprised! But no, I came along as part of the deal. It was an easy choice. So I was living
Sure.
in rural Wyoming, and Wyoming has beautiful parts, and there are things to like about that state, but they were they were invisible to me. And
Sure.
the choice of either staying in the middle of nowhere in Wyoming or up sticks and moving to Europe, it was a very easy decision. And it's interesting. One of the first challenges I found was the school system is it's just structured differently. So
Sure.
you graduate with the equivalent of a high school education at the age of 16,
Okay.
and it's a little more compact, it's a little more dense. They just structure it a little differently, and it turned out that worked out well for me. That gave me a challenge, that gave me sort of a kick in the pants to really buckle down and focus, because I didn't do great academically here in the U.S. I had no motivation. I think in the end I was barely even showing up most days, but maybe I was hitting 2 or 3 days a week where I'd actually just even bother to show up,
Sure.
and that's not a good trajectory to be on. But uh, in the UK, I effectively skipped 2 grades, and that was enough to get me engaged again. And you know, it's really valuable because you get some
Right.
perspective outside of your own echo chamber, and even somewhere as arguably homogenous as the US and the UK, you still get a tremendous amount of perspective. And I
Hmm.
and I, I think that might be one of the most valuable things that I've learned in my experience in life is be able to, again, to look at things from the outside
Right.
instead of from the inside.
Right. Instead of being stuck into
But it
that's how we've
was
always done it mindset.
Yeah, and it was super valuable for me. I loved it. In fact, I had no plans to ever repatriate back to the U.S. for a good chunk of my tenure there. I was there for about 10 years, maybe 11, but the finally I did, and I came back here, and I've been quite happy in Colorado ever since.
Nice.
With the exception I moved around a little bit, but
Sure.
yeah, it was definitely interesting. I miss it. Um, for although right now I feel like we're all having challenges. I guess having some dual perspective
Right.
is the grass is not always greener on the other side. They just it seems like everybody's struggling with different things,
Yeah.
but
That's very fair. So, how did you get into magic? I mean, I've always known you from more the magician side of your personality, and At least that's how I first met you, I guess might be a better way of phrasing it. How how did that become a thing for you? When did that sort of itch, desire to be scratched?
Yeah. I can tell you the short version, the long version, the extremely long version.
I mean,
I'll,
we're
I'll
here
start
till
with the
you tell
short.
me I need to go back to work. So you tell whatever version
Yeah.
you want to tell.
Oh, right on. Well, I think it was David Blaine famously said that you don't get into magic, magic gets into you.
Gotcha.
And I believe there's a little bit of truth in that. Now, how this actually happened, it really was something that I was always naturally drawn to. I remember some of my earliest memories. I had a drawer in my bedroom, and I couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old, and I had this drawer in my bedroom that was about 9 or 10 decks of cards just dumped into this drawer, and occasionally I would assemble a deck out of whatever I could find, and I saw something on TV. Somebody was doing this maneuver. In magically, officially, the nomenclature for this particular flourish is the Waterfall Shuffle, and I'm gonna regret this immediately. I'm so rusty now that a year of COVID,
We'll fix
but
it
it
in
looks something
post.
like this, right? Yeah. Oh, that's what I get for. Here we go. I'm not even sure if I'm in frame or
You
not.
are. I see it. I see it.
All right. I have no idea how that looked. I
You,
realized
you
that
got to
I'm not
practice
used
all
to.
day, every day, right? I remember seeing a documentary about an up close card guy who like always had two decks of cards in his hands, always shuffling them from basically the moment he awoke until the moment he went to sleep, and had thousands of decks of cards, and that was his expertise.
I have at least I have at least 5 decks on my desk. I've got a deck in this bottle right now,
Excellent.
and then several more decks back there. But yeah, that's about right. But anyway, that's a waterfall shuffle.
Yeah.
That little flourish, and I realized that I am not practiced at all watching myself do this on a camera that is flipped, by the way. And
That's why you
so
struggled, because the camera had you flipped. That's all. It's not you.
Exactly. That's my story, and I'm sticking with it. But I saw somebody perform that flourish years and years ago. Again, I was like 6 or 7 years old, and I thought, aha. And I went into my mom's sewing kit and I tried to thread a needle through every single card. And then I went to attempt this flourish myself because I just assumed, oh, they're all on a string.
Sure.
They might be. That's a thing you can buy. It's called an electric deck, and it's a deck of cards where they are all strung together.
Sure.
But I you don't need that to do this. And I tried it, and what happened was it just kind of
Stuck
did
together.
that.
Hmm.
And I thought, obviously, this needs some refinement. That's too much work. So, and then back into the drawer it went. But I was always playing with cards, and I was always trying to invent little magic tricks. But for me, the moment that changed my life was I was about 8 years old, 9 years old, somewhere around there, and I went to the library discard sale. This was something that my family would do as kind of one of our annual traditions. We'd go to the last day of the discard sale. Now, I grew up in a fairly modest household. My mother was a school teacher turned stay-at-home mom. My dad was a coal miner. We lived in rural Wyoming. I mean, we didn't have a lot of we didn't have a lot of the trappings of modern society available to us. But my folks wanted to give us every advantage that they could. So they one of the things that was really important to them is they wanted books to be in the house. That was just something they believed strongly in. And we were regular patrons of the library, but we would always go to the discard sale. And on the
Sure.
very last day, it was just like liquidation. It was get it the heck out of here. So for $1, they give you a giant grocery bag and as many books as you could stuff in there for $1. Okay.
Nice.
And so my mom would give me $1, my sister $1, and off we would go. And on a whim, I grabbed a book. Now I still have it. It has deteriorated somewhat over the years, but this
Wow.
is the book. It was called Magic Digest by George B. Anderson.
Oh my gosh.
And in fact, it still has the discard stamps around here somewhere, I'm sure, if I were to look. But the thing about this book was it was a very comprehensive education, not just in technique, just different styles of performance, but history, philosophy, all of this stuff, marketing, how to build a show. I mean, it was actually a tremendously good book. Oh, look at this. There's one of the discard stamps.
Oh, wow. That's crazy.
And I got that on a whim. And that one book
That was that.
is what turned Magic from this kind of thing that I was curious about to this thing that I was obsessed over. And by the time I kind of went into my teens, I had devoured everything in this and a handful of other books. And then one day it just came out in common knowledge that this was something that I could do. And forever in my teenage years, especially in the UK, I was that guy who did Magic. And it became a very fast iterating loop because every day people would want to see something new, and I had to constantly learn and devour this. And it's been, it's been a journey ever since. I think around 18 or 19, one of my first jobs, I was the house magician at TGI Fridays because, dreams really do come true. And I decided that I wanted to do this for a living. Okay. And that was the only thing that, in hindsight, I think worked out well, but at the time it was a questionable decision. Was that, okay, well, as soon as I'm making as much money doing Magic as I am my software gig, well, then I'm going to quit and do Magic full time.
Sure.
And the problem is that's a moving goalpost.
Yes,
this is like Zeno's paradox. As soon as I
don't give me a promotion. I want to go do Magic.
Yeah. And it worked until about 2014 was when I finally broke. And it was something I couldn't sleep, and I got up and I'm like, okay, I'm not going to lay here in a dark room anymore. I get up, I sit in my living room, turn the lights on, and I'm just kind of not sure what to do. And I can't put my finger on what's wrong. And suddenly, a sentence began to form in my brain, and it evolved and it crystallized. And what it turned into was how I was going to tell my boss that I was quitting. And once I'd kind of structured that, I went back to bed and slept soundly, slept like a rock. And the next morning I went into the office and knocked on my boss's door and told him, this is how I started. I said, Robert, my heart's not in it. And he just looked at me and says, I know. And I think I worked 3 more months and I quit to do Magic full time. The cruel irony of life, though, was my biggest client was No Fluff, Just Stuff. I was doing like 25 events with Jay a year,
right?
And that was fine. And then he says, have you thought about speaking? And like, no, but I'll give it a shot. And before I knew it, I was like sucked right back into this world. And I was writing more code as a professional magician than I ever did as a corporate coder. And that's just kind of how my life worked out. And, obviously speaking and doing all this opened up all kinds of other engagements for consulting and freelance work and everything else. And I'm not fighting it anymore. I feel like the two have become intertwined for me.
Sure. So how about software?
Yeah, that's how I got there.
How'd you get into software then? Was it a book at the discard sale as well, or was that more organic?
Oh, that's a great question. So growing up, the last year that my mom was working as a teacher, at the time, Apple was really big in the educational sector. Mm-hmm. I mean, they were considered, this is like the computer, the Apple II was the computer you have in schools. Right. And of course, I imagine probably majority of people listening to this have never even seen an Apple II. But that was the thing. And my folks, they wanted the best for us within our means.
Sure.
And they took on a real hardship. They bought an Apple II GS, and that's something like a $3,000 computer in $87. So I have no idea how much this is today. But that turned out to be a bad investment because in 1984, the Macintosh was released, and it was sort of a competing product to the Apple II, and the Apple II survived a couple more years into the late 80s. But we bought this thing, this absolutely state-of-the-art computer, and it was actually, at that time, it was more advanced in some ways than the Macintosh, but it was a dead platform. And very quickly, all of the things that one might want to buy for their Apple II was just not available. That the world had coalesced around Windows and Windows 3.1. The Apple ecosystem is coalesced around the Mac, and I had this extremely expensive paperweight that I didn't know what to do. And of course, my folks wouldn't buy a new computer
No, I already bought one.
because they're still
What's wrong with
paying
that
for
one?
the old one. And my dad almost punched the. I feel like, I don't know if if I'm remembering this wrong, but I feel like my dad was pretty angry. It's a little bit of a stretch to say he almost punched the guy, but he was pretty angry when he went in and we were trying to buy some software or hardware or something. And this was not even a year after buying the Apple II. And he says, well, do you don't have anything for this computer that you just sold us? He's like, well, you know how it is with computers. They're obsolete almost as soon as you open the box, which is not a very savvy
Don't say
salesperson-y
that
thing
to
to
your
say.
customer. No.
Yeah, not maybe not quite like that, but anyway, it was I had to do something with this, and there just wasn't anything we could buy. And I started reading all the books, and one of the books that I read was A Touch of AppleSoft Basic, and I couldn't buy software for this computer anymore, but it didn't matter because I could make anything that I can imagine. And that was really where it all started. And then, of course, going into school, that was where I started to cause some trouble because
No
that's when I
way.
realized
You?
I could write software that would achieve various nefarious aims. I would build applications that looked exactly like the login screen. And when you attempted to log in, it would write that to a file, and then it would pop up the bad username or password dialog, log the entire system out, and then it would show you the real one. You'd log in, and they just thought they fat fingered it. I used to know everybody's password. I used to write little practical joke apps all the time. One of my favorite things was when my mom was dating my stepdad. This was a long distance over the internet relationship before that was a thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, now that's a pretty standard how you met story, but in the 90s, you met your fiance on the internet. Are you crazy? What? And they would talk, and usually it was like 2:00 in the morning Mountain Time. And so one of the things I did on the family computer was I installed some software that between the hours of midnight and 6 a.m., it would randomly remap the keyboard one key over just for one keystroke. And it just so basically my mom was typoing about every 10th or 20th keystroke. And just as a little joke to see how long it would take her to find out, it took her, by my recollection, about 45 minutes because she had been online for about 45 minutes when the bucket of ice water was dumped on me in bed, and I was instructed to fix it. So, but the thing was, I was always in trouble at school for these kinds of things, but at the same time, I was always honest about it. It's like every now and again I would try something and whoops, I took down the domain controller or something. Sorry. And the administrators in my schools, they'd always know. They'd say, hey, I see we have a new administrator account on our Active Directory or whatever it was at the time, on our NT, whatever, because it was back in the NT days. I see we have a new administrator account. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you? I'm like, yeah.
Yeah, that was me. Sorry.
And they said, yeah, that was me. And he's like, okay, well, I'm going to let it go, but you got to tell me how you did that. And that was, and I think for a lot of my life, my younger life, technology was kind of a dodge. It was kind of it was my own form of magic. I had one of my first jobs that wasn't doing card tricks table to table TGI Fridays was I was an office system administrator or an office administrator. And I did a lot of stuff with Excel and things like that. And it was just massaging spreadsheets and formatting things and very rote, repetitive, boring stuff. And I learned really quickly. One day I accidentally hit Alt F11 and the VBA editor popped up in Excel. And I was like, whoa, I can do this. Game changer. And I automated my entire job. And my boss hated me because she knew that I wasn't doing anything. She knew that because my desk was right outside of her office and I just went for walks or talked to people or goofed off all day.
But yet your work was getting done.
Exactly. And I think, she still probably doesn't like me, even though we haven't talked in 20 some odd years. She's, I think that she had very strong feelings about me, and not good ones. But that was, that finally this came out, and I became an office systems developer, and everything kind of started. But yeah, it was magic and technology were just two things that have always been a part of my life. And like, I can't remember a time when they weren't.
Sure. Now, are you sure you weren't encouraged to miss some school? I mean, it almost sounds like, your administrators, your principal, your dean of students were like, Michael, it'd be okay if you didn't come in for a couple days. They have a word for that, I think, in the lexicon of education. You sure that's not why you're missing some school? Suspended?
Suspect, something.
Sus. I think
Oh,
the kids now, when they're playing Among Us, they say that a lot. That's sus.
sus. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I mean, there was some of that, and for sure, the thing that I think was probably when it was time to leave the country was when it transpired that I had put keyloggers on the administrative staff's computers, and I had actually gotten access to the school district mainframe.
Oh my.
So they had an AS400 in the central administration building that had everything, and in fact, that remains my only regret in life, is that I didn't just pull the trigger and change my grades. Like, this is before that would put me on a terrorist watch list. Right. That was before, when these things were just kind of, and forgive the turn of phrase, but boys will be boys type of thing. When you could get away with criminal activity.
Well, Ferris Bueller showed us that it's totally illegitimate, right? So I think that's what you were doing. You just didn't go all the way to the Bueller extreme there of changing how many days you were absent and things of that
And I could have done that. Well, the other thing though was, I could have done that, but the changing the dates you were absent. I mean, low tech, that was vulnerable to low tech attacks.
Right.
That I would man in the middle the attendance sheets, because people would fill out OMRs. And all I would do is they would fill out an OMR at the beginning of class, and then they would hang it they would clip it to the door of the classroom.
Sure.
And I would just go up to whatever class I was supposed to be in, grab that, erase the A, fill in the T for tardy, and then just leave it there. And I guess that's not technically a man in the middle, but maybe this is what the evil maid or whatever that vulnerability is.
It's close enough for government work.
But they weren't particularly protective about this. So my stats looked better on digitally than they did.
To change it. Now, please tell me at some point when they asked you how you did it, you did some flourish and said magic.
That one never came up. I don't think anybody knew that.
Okay. Right.
That I was doing that, and I also didn't change anything in the mainframe in the AS400, although I really kind of wished I had. Just to have that in my bio, especially if you get caught. Like, I would have that clipping. I would frame that, Green River student caught changing grades in school district computer. I mean, that's
magic.
That's like, yeah. That's a lifetime accomplishment right there.
See, now when I think 80s and apples, I immediately think, of course, of Oregon Trail. So did you have some experiences? How many times did you die of dysentery?
All of them, I think.
Right.
And it's funny. I played Oregon Trail for some nostalgia reasons a couple of years ago, and it's very different playing it as an adult than as a child. Because as a kid, it's just like, haha, you got dysentery, you got bit by a snake. And I would actually name my family after people around me.
Oh, sure.
And it was like my sister, I'd be like, haha, Sarah, you broke your arm. But as an adult playing this, like, I understand the weight, the existential weight of picking your family up and putting everything in a wagon and going west, and you have no idea what's there, and you're never going to talk to any of these people ever again. And it's going to take months, and people are going to die. And it's just like, oh my God, my family is dying and I don't know what to do. And I'm out of bullets and it's snowing and I'm not even to Independence Rock yet.
Right.
What am I doing?
Well, you know, having grown up in Wyoming, I'm sure you can appreciate that there's a lot of space between St. Louis and Oregon. And what's remarkable to me, having driven out that way, to do that in like a covered wagon, that takes some serious, chutzpah. I mean, that's not something you
Yeah.
undertake lightly, because to your point, there's not a whole lot between here and there. And, nowadays we just pull off the side of the road, and you hit the local convenience store, and you grab a power bar or whatever. But that option didn't exist during the wagon era, and it really is remarkable that someone thought, yeah, no, I'm just gonna go west and see what happens. It'll probably be fine. What could possibly go wrong? And there's a lot of elevation between the Midwest and the West that I think we lose sight of. There's these mountains in between that you've got to find a way to and through, and it
Yeah,
snows.
South Pass, or
Yeah,
I mean, you had a couple passes, and that was it. And actually, so in Wyoming, Independence Rock is there, and I remember we went to see that on a school trip, and we just thought it was cool that all these people like carved their names into this rock.
hmm
So if you're not familiar, it's a landmark on the Oregon Trail, and when people got to this landmark, they would just carve their names on a rock or write it in tar or something. And I always just sort of, in my mind, it was kind of the equivalent of a bathroom stall wall. Michael was here,
right.
1992. But I realize now that what that was it was kind of like posting your status updates. It's like, by the way, I made it this far and I'm still
Right,
alive.
right,
And so, like, if you're following other family or other friends,
right,
you get to Independence Rock and you just like run to it. It's like, have they even survived? Did Nate even make it this?
right.
There's his name. He
Oh,
made it
thank
at
God
least
he's
this
alive.
far. Because, you haven't talked in 6 months or a year or
Right.
two or whatever. But yeah, so Oregon Trail is sort of an interesting one. I have a soft spot in my heart for all of the MECC, the Minnesota Educational Computing Company or whatever. I think they published Oregon Trail, if I remember, but they published like Number Munchers and all of these other educational games that we had in spades growing up.
Yes,
But that
the
was a very
mark of
familiar logo.
those of us from the '80s, the Oregon Trail. I have a board game version of that actually that I've played a few times, and yes,
Oh, that's brutal.
you typically do die of something along the way. Cholera is also very popular. I just forget about that. You can die of cholera too. So
Yeah, I've played the board game version of Oregon Trail, and it's brutal. I'm not gonna lie. The last time I played it, just because I got so sick of dying right away, was I shuffled very carefully the
oh,
cards
yes,
to give
yes,
us at least a shot.
right.
But my favorite memory, the first time we played this, we were we were trying to figure out who was born the furthest west,
Okay,
because that was the rule. That's how you decide who goes first. Whoever is
sure.
born the furthest west. And we're trying to figure out, well, is Southwest Wyoming west of like Rock Springs, Green River, Wyoming, west of Grand Junction. Somebody else is born in the UK, but where, which
Hmm.
side of the meridian, because
Mm-hmm.
that's really important.
Sure. Good point.
And we're arguing and arguing and arguing about this, and somebody's like, you know what, I was born the furthest west. And I'm like, I don't think you were, but in fact, I already have Latin law, but whatever, you go first. I'm gonna pick my battles.
Yes,
And
yes.
she's
Not the
like,
hill you
okay.
want to
And
die
she turns over the first card and it says, you have died of dysentery.
on.
And that was it. Haven't even left Independence, Missouri, already
Fantastic.
dead.
Fantastic. Oh, that's awesome. Well, we touched on the pandemic a little earlier, so I'm always curious, how are you getting by? What are you doing? Have you picked up any habits? You baking bread? I made the mistake of starting that a couple months ago, and now, unfortunately, my family pretty much demands fresh baked bread every 2 or 3 days. In fact, I've already been told I need to make bread tomorrow, so I guess that'll be part of tomorrow's schedule. So, are you doing anything to kind of make it through? What kind of habits you picking up?
Uh, I'm not baking bread. I'm avoiding the bread. I've been, in fact, when I was doing a little bit of preparation, just in case it was germane, I grabbed a few video clips of different performance pieces and select snippets of lectures and things like that. And I was looking at this picture of me on the keynote stage at O'Reilly SACon a couple of years
Yeah.
ago, and my first thought was, "Wow, I was chunky. I was about 50 pounds heavier than I am today." So one of the things I managed to do is to stay on my dietary kick. So I'm what I would call a keto lifer.
Okay.
I did lose weight. I kind of just maintain now, but I stay on the low carb lifestyle for for other reasons, not weight loss, but mental health, physical health. My blood pressure, cardiovascular, my various metrics, like all of these things have gotten better
Mhm.
since I cut out the grains and the sugars. Um, and with Kate and I, we really got into like perfecting this lifestyle that I can eat amazingly every single day and never feel an ounce of deprivation from because I don't get to eat some carby food. We've figured out we've cracked the code of pizza and fettuccine alfredo and all of these carby delights, and we can kind of have that. So that was a big part of it. We spent a lot of time cooking, but it was also just good for us in general. So
Sure.
so Kate, my wife, we got together in 2017. We got married coming up on 2 years ago, and but basically from the moment that her life and my life kind of reconnected, came full circle. We met incidentally when I was living in the UK. We're both from the middle of nowhere in Wyoming, the same little town, but we met in London. I was on my way to the magic shop, and she was on a double decker bus, and I lost my balance and fell on her lap, and kind of followed her around for the rest of the
See,
day. And
that's
we were
fate
pen
right
pals.
there. How can you not?
It just took some time to
Right.
to
Right.
come all the way around, but we did that. And but ever since we reconnected in 2017, late 2017, just we've been moving a million miles an hour. She started traveling with me all the time. I mean, she started working on the conference tour, and so part of this as well was just kind of finding our groove,
Sure.
because we could finally be still for a little while. The thing that I have, I've started doing a couple weird little hobbies. One is putting things in bottles. I've got the deck of cards in a bottle. I'm working on some other variations of this, just building impossible objects. I started brewing kombucha in
Yeah.
in anger.
Yeah, we were talking about that
So I'm
earlier.
yeah. In fact, I've got coffee kombucha on the go right now, which I'm a little terrified of, because I've only ever made kombucha from tea. If you're not familiar, kombucha is a fermented tea that's supposed to be very healthy. You put some sugar and tea in a jar, you throw a culture in there, and then you let it ferment for a week, and then you bottle it and drink it. But I'm trying this with coffee,
Okay.
and I don't have a lot of sources to tell me that this is or isn't a good idea. And so I now have coffee that's been sitting on my counter for a week, and it's either going to be amazing or toxic. We'll
Yeah.
find out.
Yeah. Well, let me know one way or the other. If I don't hear from you
Sure.
in like 2 weeks, then I'll know Michael died of coffee dysentery, or it's the, toxic coffee.
Coffee, Laura, come
Yeah.
back to me.
Yeah. We'll
I'll have
workshop
something
that.
for
You
you.
and I'll workshop that. We'll come up with something better. Fascinating. So are you excited to get back on the road? I mean, at some point, we'll be vaccinated, things will return to some form of normalcy. Do you see yourself doing some more travel when you can, or are you pretty happy living in Colorado? And
That's the other thing, is so much of what we do in life is driven by inertia,
hmm
purely by inertia. And we there's so much just constantly happening. We're on the treadmill of life, and it's going at an uncomfortable speed, that you don't have time to stop and say, am I still happy with these decisions that I
sure,
made 5 or 10 or 20 years ago? And all of that ground to a halt last year.
yeah,
I went from being on a plane every 3 days again. I was starting back into that cadence, and to everything just
stopped,
stopped. And
yeah,
at first, it was like I don't know what to do with my hands.
hmm
And then
you're just packing a bag habitually because that's what you did on
yeah,
a Tuesday afternoon. Yeah.
and in fact, I had usually I had 3 bags packed already ready to go. And
hmm
so I would go home, I would dump all my the stuff in the laundry, and then I grab one of my packing cubes, throw it in the suitcase, and put that by the door.
Right.
So I was always packed. And I think it took me 4 months before I unpacked finally. And but a few things happened. I stopped traveling, and I was okay with that. It actually was the first time I had an opportunity to settle into my new home.
Right.
I stopped performing though too, because so much of everything that I had tried to create from a magic perspective was designed for very specific conditions,
Sure.
real world, in the trenches, surrounded, hostile spectators. I mean, I'm using that term loosely, but
Oh, we were fairly hostile too when you first showed up. We always tried to reverse engineer your tricks, and then you'd find another way of confounding us.
well, that was the fun, and I never got really into performing for a camera, and there were people who did.
Sure.
Their path to notoriety was on social media.
Sure.
So they had perfected these like pithy, short, visual, camera friendly things that probably wouldn't play very well, or often wouldn't play very well in the real world, but look great on camera. And like that was stuff that was never even on my radar. If it's not
Sure.
something that I can carry in my pockets without looking like the banana man, if I can do with people standing anywhere around me, grabbing things, if I can't hand it out or borrow it, even better,
Sure.
then it wasn't even on my radar. I wouldn't even give it a second look. And the criteria for good magic just 180'd overnight. And I just didn't have the energy
Sure.
to start all over again. So for me, the pandemic was kind of a much needed rest, and I'm kind of finding this new groove. It gave me an opportunity to say, okay, here's where I am. Where do I want to go?
Hmm.
Because there's nowhere I have to go right now, and so I realized that maybe for the foreseeable future, what I needed to do was get a quote unquote real job and go back to working for the man, because I just I had no idea how tired I was.
Yeah.
Speaking and performing and consulting and freelance and running a business and trying to operate a SaaS company and just all of these little side hustles I have, and I've gotten really focused back into just being a principal architect on a greenfield project,
Sure.
and it's kind of fun just to do one thing and have my weekends back,
Right.
and decide what I want to do in the evenings, instead of, well, I need to keep working, or I need to get
Hmm.
on a plane, or I need to stay up to get my 1 a.m. flight back to the United States, or whatever.
Right. Yeah, I do think that's one of the pieces that gets lost a little bit in this sort of travel heavy lifestyle. A lot of folks, I think, look at it and they say, "Oh, this must be so awesome. You get to go to all these cool places." Because for most people, travel is vacation, travel is fun. And then when you do it as part of your job, it's like, no, this is my commute. And red eye flights and canceled flights and delayed flights. And I know I've used this analogy before, but it's that lifestyle where you go from having a really good dinner, one of the best restaurants in a given city, and then the next night you're eating, a bag of peanuts on the plane because that's all you had time for. It does wear on you. There's just no getting around it, and
Mm-hmm.
it is kind of nice to actually be in the same bed for more than a couple nights in a row. And as I'm sure you've discovered, I actually have kind of a nice family. They're nice to be around. They're very nice people, and
Yeah.
it
I,
doesn't always have to be on the road.
and I, for one, am looking forward to taking a flight purely for pleasure and not having an agenda. Landing at 2 a.m. because of
Right.
flight delays and everything like that, and I gotta be on stage to give a keynote in like 6 hours,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
somewhere, an hour cab ride away from the airport that I'm at right now,
Yeah,
and having to just run that marathon.
I did the embedded conference once where I was in Florida for actually three events in a row, but there was a gap in between the first two. And so I actually red-eyed to Paris to do a presentation, then turned around and came back because that's what I had to do for my schedule. And, it does make for an interesting story, but in retrospect, it's like, yeah, that's kind of a brutal week of travel, jammed into 5 days, but zeroth world problem, as I like to say.
Yeah, that was yep, I did one of those. It was close a conference and break down a conference in Reston, Virginia on Sunday, late Sunday night, red eye to India,
Mm.
arrive whatever day I arrive. I think I lose a day.
I
I
always
get
get
this
messed
flipped,
up with the dateline.
but I lose a day, and so I basically arrive. I get back to my hotel 6 a.m. Tuesday morning, and a car is there to pick me up at 7:30 to take me to open this keynote. And I did the keynote. I spoke all day for 2 days. I spoke all day Tuesday. I spoke all day Wednesday. Wednesday night, I fly back, or Thursday morning, something like that. I fly back and I go directly to Columbus. And so I get into Columbus at 1 a.m. Friday morning, and I kick off the conference at 8 a.m. That same day. And that was just 1 week. And I used to think that was okay. I don't think
Isn't
I
that
would do this by
romantic?
choice anymore. Right?
So is there anything you're reading or streaming that's helping you out, keeping you level? Anything that you recommend?
Great question as well. So right now, I mean, I'm really diving deep into this new role because there's a lot of kind of emerging problems we're trying to solve, and so
Sure.
I'm diving deep into the semantic web. I think that's an insanely interesting topic that hasn't been on my radar for most of the last 20 years, and maybe it should have been. But I'm diving into that. In terms of non technical stuff that I'm reading right now, I just picked up a couple books by R. Buckminster Fuller.
Oh, okay.
So Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth. I think the other one is I want to say pattern thinking, but I don't think that's quite it. It's like system thinking or pattern thinking. There's another Buckminster Fuller book that I got. I'm just kind of going through some of these more philosophical nonfiction-y things. Um, the other thing that I'm just trying to go back through is just try to fill in gaps in my knowledge
Sure.
that I've been aware of, and trying to just in my technical skills and everything else. So I'm reading Marco Fiala's Seriously Good Software, which is kind of like a graduate course on algorithms and optimization and things like that. And it's just kind of a good refresher because I haven't thought about a lot of this stuff in 20 years.
Right.
And now I'm kind of like, let's think about that. But
Nice.
yeah, lots of things like that. And I'm trying to think if there's any actual either fiction or anything else that I'm reading outside of that. That's it. Just trying to read more and take that downtime.
Sure. Nice. What do you think the first place you'll go to when you're free to move about the country again?
Probably, it's a tie. Maybe New Orleans.
Okay.
That's a real special place to me and Kate. It might be Hawaii.
Ooh.
We had a very elaborate trip planned for 2020
Mm-hmm.
that I think I got all my deposits paid and everything booked around February of
Oh,
2020.
ouch.
And so now I have $10,000 of credit with United Airlines. Um, and I've got $4,000 credit with some, vacation home company.
Mm-hmm.
So we do need a do over. It was for Kate's milestone birthday, and we had this very elaborate thing planned. It was all a big surprise and all a big
Oh,
ruse, and I finally had to let the cat out of the bag that no, we were not in fact going to Vegas for her birthday, which she thought was an odd choice, but she
right.
would go with it.
Sure.
That was just the decoy because I had
Checks out.
I forget what pretense it was that I had, but there was some pretense that this was plausible. And in fact, we were going to go to the gate, and my boarding pass wasn't going to scan, and I was going to rage cancel the reservation because she had an actual reservation to Vegas
Okay.
and I didn't. I was going to rage cancel the reservation at the counter at the gate, and she's like, "What are we doing?" And I'm like, "That's okay. I'm going to figure it out." And then I go talk to the customer desk in the lounge and get the real boarding passes printed out. It's
Nice.
okay. I sorted out. We got new flights, but we got to go right now because they're boarding. And we would go straight to the gate that is labeled Maui. And I had first class round trip tickets on the 787
Oh.
in Polaris, direct Denver to Maui, and there were going to be some familiar faces in the aisle as well, in the row as well, waiting for us with champagne, and there were others. That was like just the tip of the surprise iceberg, and
Nice.
so much went into this, and it just killed me. But I would love to take that trip,
Awesome. Well,
so probably something like that.
I hope you get a chance to do that sooner rather than later. But Hawaii's been on my list for a long time. I just haven't had a good opportunity to make that happen. But I'm sure at some point Christina and I'll have to venture.
Is Lava One still happening? Is that still a thing?
At this point, I have no idea what is or isn't going on. I actually this morning I was going through my email. There's at least a couple of CFPs that are out for normal events, and I'm sure I'll throw my hat in the ring, but I really have no idea what's going to happen, this summer or this fall. I honestly thought we'd mostly be back to normal by late spring, but I just don't see that happening. But who knows? Anything's
Yep.
possible. So,
Uh, if we can get the vaccine rollout uh, straightened out, I mean, I don't know. I tend to trust the scientists,
mhm.
so I I I I believe the studies and the results of the studies that this will be a positive thing. But
When I see all
obviously,
these
there's
people who don't want to get their vaccines, I'm like, I'll take it. If they don't want it,
yep.
I'm good. Where do I get on the waiting list for people who refuse to take it? I'll happily step in at that point. But yeah, fingers
There
crossed.
might become some kind of free market solution where you can put your spot on the list on the exchange, and
Oh, but then the
if you
redditors will
don't
come
care,
along and there'll be a short squeeze, and Robinhood will
yep.
suspend trading.
Before
Let
we know it, hedge fund owns
right,
all the futures contracts of
right, exactly. Yep. Well, let me throw a few lightning round questions at you. So I have an idea what you're going to say to most of these, but I'm always curious to see how you respond. So oceans or mountains?
Mount oceans.
Okay.
I
You live
don't
in
know why
mountains.
I live in mountains, oceans. I love to scuba dive. I love the I don't know. Also, it's colored by my. I mean, I like my mountains as much as the next person, but if I had to pick, I like my oceans.
Now, my son has offered to trade Colorado, say, 1,000 lakes for a couple of your mountains. If you could facilitate that, I think we could make something happen.
I feel like we are rich in mountains and you are rich in lakes.
Right. Let's make a trade.
Yeah, I could be down for this.
This feels like a
Also,
win-win for everybody.
we also, if nothing else, need some more reservoirs. So that's probably
Right.
going to be a net positive trade on the Colorado side
Right.
for
And I,
sure.
I just want to put some mountains on the western side of the cities to block the snow so that
Yeah,
we have a little more of a temperate climate here. But, what are you going
kind
to
of
do?
like we have here in Denver.
Yeah,
Although
don't get me started.
you do have that ski slope on the in South Minneapolis.
Well, I mean, Lindsey Vaughn came out of here, so there are some ski rock stars that came out of this area. But I mean, whether we really would call those ski mountains, no, they're hills, they're ski hills. It's fine, it's fine.
Yeah.
But they're very, I mean, they crank out some extremely good skiers, which is amazing to me. But I'm not a winter sports person. I become a house cat once the snow flies. I don't leave the house.
You and me both. I don't like the cold weather. That's
Mm-mm.
why I only managed to survive one winter in Minnesota.
Yeah, oh,
And I
that's
was
right.
gone. I was gone by February. I'm like,
Oh
I'm
my
done.
God, I forgot about that. We could have gotten into that. Jeez, I totally forgot about the time you were my neighbor practically. How about food trucks versus Michelin stars?
Ooh, ooh, ooh. What about Michelin starred food trucks? Because that is a
Even
thing.
better. Yeah.
I don't know. I love the food trucks. There's just this renaissance in creativity, and
Yes.
it seems to have lowered the barrier for people to iterate over wild ideas.
Hmm.
In during the pandemic, I started watching some of these reality shows, and one of them was called Million Pound Menu, and they were, and a lot of these people had really great food truck concepts that they were trying to take to the next level,
Sure.
and there's just so much innovation happening right now. I think you can never go wrong with a Michelin starred restaurant, but you have the opportunity to uncover some truly hidden gems in the food
Yeah.
truck world. So I'm more of an adventurer. I'm going to say food trucks.
Okay. All right. How about Game of Thrones versus Lord of the Rings?
I have never seen Game of Thrones. Not a moment of it. I know some of the references just by
Winter is
pop
coming.
culture like saturation, but I know a Lannister always pays their debts.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, I know of fire dragons and ice dragons, but
Right.
I don't know much beyond that.
Okay.
So so having followed the Tolkien universe
Sure.
somewhat
Sure.
casually, I would say let's see what Game of Thrones has to offer.
Okay.
But I'm afraid to open that can of worms because because I've known so many Game of Thrones fans, and
Well,
that's what makes me fear it.
I think it's worth binging, though. I mean, I do think that's one of the fascinating aspects about our streaming culture now is you can binge a show and get through it in a relatively short amount of time. We're working our way through Friends. In fact, we just finished season 6 last night, and when we got to the end of season 1, we had to explain to our son, in the olden times, in the before times, you used to have these things called cliffhangers, and so at the end of the spring, this would be the episode that would keep you to come back in the fall, whereas now you just keep going until you hit stop, and they just every 10 seconds, oh, here comes another one. Oh, okay, all right, I guess I'm gonna watch another 7 or 8 of these and see what happens.
I felt like Friends didn't age well because I remember when it came out in the '90s, and I remember rewatching it more recently, or some of it, and it just didn't seem like it aged well.
I still find it incredibly funny, and maybe it's a bit of nostalgia for sort of that part of my life. I mean, we think back to where we were, but I don't know. I still think it's fairly. I mean, there's a few things that you might say they probably would not have written that joke in 2018 or 2020, but by and large, I think it still fits fairly well. Although again, maybe I'm biased because I grew up with that, so who knows? But
Yeah, it's in reality, it's a combination of all the above, and
yeah,
I actually am bringing biases into this as well, but I'm not going to go there.
DC or Marvel?
Marvel, I just I've been in that world, I've been there so long. I get my mail there. I visit DC from time to
Sure,
time, but Marvel's home.
sure, that's fair. Action, comedy, or drama?
It really depends on my mood. It really does. It depends on if I want to think or not.
Mm,
And that's and sometimes I don't. And I just like I went through. I went there. Oh, there was a darker part of the pandemic where I just went through and I just watched like all of the mindless, like National Treasure
mm,
and the
mm.
Bourne movies
Yes,
and
yes.
Die Hard, or and I watched the whole Die Hard
Yep,
series
yep.
that also. Um, yeah, there's a reason that I don't think about the latter Die Hard movies, 3, 4, and so on. And
Right.
but but it was nice having something that I didn't, I could like leave the room for 20 minutes and go make a snack and come back, and it's just a different fight.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like I haven't, but it
I didn't really
depends.
miss anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think in this era of doom scrolling, anything that gets your mind off of that is perfectly reasonable, regardless of the genre.
Yeah, and that's what I've been really trying to stop. I actually, I am trying to get. I subscribe now to The Economist, and
Mhm.
I never thought I would be that adult. When I was a kid, I just wouldn't have considered that. But it's like it's a weekly magazine, and I try to use that for my news. It's been
Sure,
hard lately,
sure.
for a lot of January, because like January 6th, January 7th, I'm reading last week's
Yes,
news,
yes,
and it feels like last century's
yes.
news.
That
It's
didn't age
just,
well, as they say.
yes.
Hmm.
And I just couldn't do it. But now things have sort of settled a little bit, and I'm back into just trying to govern my consumption of
Sure,
news.
sure. Yeah, I think it's important to somehow disengage if you wallow in it for too long, if you steep in it too long, I think it can have a negative effect on a lot of things. But how about tabs versus spaces? Where do you come down on that age-old debate?
Oh, spaces.
Spaces, okay,
Um, like I use the tab key, but it converts it to
sure.
spaces in my IDE by default, and it goes way, way, way back to this tool that I used in 2006 to preview and stage deployments. We had a custom kind of CD, using the term loosely, deployment management tool for databases. I was a DBA, and now I've got two strikes against me for some
Right,
people,
right.
but spaces and DBA. But
Well, and three because the magician thing, but we won't hold that against you.
true, yeah. But hopefully not all three at the same time.
Right, right.
But it was, our tool just didn't render spaces or tabs very well, and so
Okay.
it was really hard to preview all these scripts. And so we standardized on spaces, and I have ever since. Now I just let my linters kind of handle that. I do what I do,
Right.
and when I check it in, like they get what they get. I try not to check in all the white space differences because I feel like that's kind of a not very nice thing to do.
Right.
You know, every file I touch has every line modified when you do a diff, if you've got a lousy diff tool.
Mm-hmm.
But it's I never liked that. I worked with a fellow who would just auto format and auto apply rules to every class that they touched, and then they never tested anything,
Oh,
you know,
perfect.
manually or programmatically, and they would just check in their code and go home for the day.
Perfect.
And who am I kidding? That was me. No, but they would do this, and then I'm still here, and I'm like, the build broke, and so I'm like, well, let's do a, you know, a diff or a git bisect, and oh, 50 files have changed, and in those 50 files, every single line has changed. Thanks, dude. And then I would usually just roll back the change and then
Right.
check in over it. And
I know a friend of mine at one point was trying to establish those standards at an organization, and he said it took him 9 months to get everybody to finally adhere to their standards. And his whole point was, listen, do whatever you want, but before you check it in, just run this command, and it will automatically format it the way it's supposed to be, and then check it in. You know, but you know, if you want to go ahead and reformat it while you're working on it, knock yourself out. But you know, I will never forget. I paired with this person who used, I kid you not, VI in Java, and was actually surprisingly efficient. You know, this was quite a while ago, before Java had quite grown to the level it is today. Although even at that point, I thought it was amazing this person was using VI. But we spent the first probably hour and a half of this pairing session just me watching him go through and reformat the files we were going to work on that day. I'm just like, this is awesome. Great use of my time. Could we start solving the problem we're here to solve, or are we just going to reformat for the entire afternoon? So yeah, it's good times. Good times. Well, my friend, we're past the hour. I should probably let you get back to your real life, and I should probably go eat some lunch or something, or bake some bread. I'm sure my family will have some instructions for me. But I want to thank you so much for hanging out with me, my friend. I appreciate it.
it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you. We that's what I miss.
Me too.
You know, I don't miss getting on planes. I don't miss, you know, watching the upgrade list and crossing my fingers and more often than not being first loser. I don't
Oh
miss
boy, is that the worst?
early mornings, the late nights.
Yeah.
Well, I miss some of the late nights,
Yeah.
but I miss this,
Me too.
and so very grateful for the opportunity just to kind of catch up
Right.
with old friends. Um, and I think you and I both are starting to fall into both of the potential categories of that
Yes. Yes.
of that definition.
Time flies.
Yep. I got a message from Venkat after the panel discussion on Friday. He says, I noticed you're wearing glasses now. I'm like, yeah, I can't fight this anymore. And I've stopped trying to dye my hair. Just you know, it's inevitable. I'm trying to age gracefully and just accept it and own it rather
Right.
than fighting it.
Yeah, well, I'm very aware of the fact that there's some gray showing up in my goatee area now, and I'm just like, oh, all right, what are you gonna do?
I
Can't
figured
fight
the
it.
classy thing was not to call attention to it.
Exactly. So, well,
But yeah,
Michael,
no,
thank you so much. I
very
miss hanging
grateful.
out with you. There's no getting around it. I mean, this is the whole reason I pulled this thing together, is an excuse for me basically to hang out with people for an hour a week, because you know it's so easy to get tied up in all the things we're doing day in day out. We forget about having these sort of contacts. So I appreciate you hanging out with me for a little bit of time today, and you know I look forward to catching up with you. I'm sure on one of our random Friday sessions, and fingers crossed we're in the real world together sometime here in the next 9 months to a year.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it as well, and we will cross again. Even if I never get back into the tour life, I will be appearing in a random city near you,
Yes,
where near the temporal you,
right,
not the
right.
permanent you. Well, maybe that too,
Minnesota is
but
lovely about 8 or 9 months out of the year.
that's what I keep hearing.
Hmm.
I was only there from October through February,
Yeah, you did it wrong.
so I did do it wrong, but I love that town honestly, and it is one of my. It's just a really hip, fun place to explore. I try to every time I'm there, I try to make a little pilgrimage out to, you know, Midtown, Lynn Lake, and a few different kind of hip spots. I don't know. I do miss it, but I don't miss an entire week where the high for the week is -15.
Yeah, we knock on wood haven't had one of those yet, so it's actually been fairly temperate. And this last snowstorm that rolled through gave us about an eighth of an inch of snow, so perfectly fine for
Well,
me, by the way.
I just remember just getting brutally mocked by the locals because it would be like -20 and I'd be bundled up, like that kid in
Yes,
I can't put my arms
yes,
down. And I walk into a store and they look at me and they can tell that I'm not from around there. And so they just have to like throw that little jab and
yep.
they say, "Oh, it's going to be a mild one, it looks like this year, eh?" And I'm like,
Don't you know?
what the hell is mild about this? And oh, no, usually it's a lot colder.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We only do that just to chastise the new people. We don't really believe that. I think most Minnesotans generally do think anything below 20, it's starting to get unpleasant. It is
Yeah.
amazing how your calibration changes. I've noticed this throughout my entire life. We'll get these temperatures in the spring, in March, be in the 60s, and everyone's outside in t-shirts and shorts and just basking in the sun. Basically, you get that same sort of mid 50s, low 60s temperature in the fall, and people are putting on the sweatshirt and they got maybe a hat on. Ooh, a little brisk today. It's amazing how quickly your body adapts. But I do know if I ever moved to your neck of the woods, I'd be broken for life, because I would get so used to not having humidity and being able to
Oh,
ski in shorts, as Scott likes to say. I'd be done. So
yeah, that humidity will get you.
yeah.
Well, I remember when I moved to Minneapolis, people were telling me, "Don't forget, it's cold. It's cold." And I'm like, "I've had cold before." And I actually went to a website and I had like the top 20 coldest places in America. And only 2 spots away from Minneapolis was Rock Springs, Wyoming.
See?
And so Rock Springs was the big city near me, population like 18,000 or something like that. It was half-hour drive or something to get there. And and I'm like, I've experienced, they're like 1 degree off. It was like the low for the year is like -20 versus -22 for
Mm.
Minneapolis. And I'm like, those are basically the same. And no, not at all. When it's -22 and 80% humidity, you're going to die. But when it's -20 and 10% humidity, yeah, I don't know. It's
It's
different.
just different. It's different. It's what you get used to.
Different.
So,
Anyway, I will talk all day if you let me.
and so will I.
So
Well, this is a Minnesota goodbye, as they say. It's the goodbye that takes
ah,
15 minutes before we finally get in the car and pull away.
there's a handful of things then that I really identify with as a one-time temporary Minnesotan. Minnesota goodbyes, cheese curds,
Oh yes.
and Sully beer.
Mm.
Right? Is that
Mm.
right? Sully Hell, Sully
Surly.
Furious,
Surly.
Surly. That's it. It's I'm under caffeinated and under hopped,
Totally fine.
so
Totally fine.
that's probably where the disconnect.
You
Thank
should
you.
be able to
But
handle
yeah, I
both
mean,
of
there's a
those.
yeah.
Your
All
kombucha
right. Well,
will solve that.
the kombucha will solve that. I should go check on the temperature of my brew
Well, let me know how
before
that
I get
turns
my
out
little
for you.
my Raspberry Pi to monitor it. I will do. But once again,
Thank you,
thank
buddy.
you
Appreciate it.
to you, Nate, to your crew, and to everybody for making this happen. This was a lot of
Awesome.
fun.
Thank you. And please join us next week, where we'll have the one and only Chris Judd will be with us.
Ooh,
I'm sure we're going to
Java
talk.
Judd.
Java Judd will be with us, so I'm very excited to catch up with him. I unfortunately have not. Normally, I have my let's have dinner with Chris when I'm in Florida for some events. Well, obviously that didn't happen, so I miss my friend here. I haven't seen him now in a while, so I'm excited to catch up with him. Much like I was so excited to catch up with you. Well, thank you again, Michael. You behave yourself. My best to your lovely wife, and we will see you soon. Cheers.
And likewise, take care.